The final piece of mail was a thick, cream-colored envelope, stiff with the kind of cardstock that costs more per sheet than a decent lunch. My name and the address of my small, rented apartment were written in an elegant, looping calligraphy that I recognized instantly. It was Jessica's. Or, more accurately, it was the script of a professional she would have hired, but the intent behind it was pure Jessica. I stood there in the narrow hallway of my temporary life, the smell of cheap paint and old carpet a constant reminder of the role I was playing. I knew, even before I opened it, that this was the final, perfect piece of her hubris, the capstone on the monument of her own self-destruction she had been so diligently building. I slit the envelope open with my thumb. Inside, an invitation. Mr. Julian Croft and Mrs. Jessica Vance, formerly Miller, request the pleasure of your company at the celebration of their marriage. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it almost made me laugh. After everything, after the lies, the betrayal, the divorce she initiated because she thought I was a broke, unambitious project manager with no future, she was now inviting me to witness her grand victory. She wanted me to see her ascend to the life she believed she deserved, with the man she thought was my superior in every way. She wanted a spectator for her triumph, and she chose the man she had discarded as worthless. It was perfect. She had just handed me the stage for my final act. My name is Mark Miller. I'm 42 years old, and for the last 15 years, I was what you would call a devoted husband. I worked as a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm, a job that was stable, demanding, and utterly unremarkable. Or so it seemed. I lived a quiet life, found satisfaction in simple routines, and believed that the foundation of a good life was built on loyalty, hard work, and honesty. I thought Jessica believed that too. I see now that she only believed in the parts that benefited her. But let me start from the beginning. Our life together had been comfortable. I made sure of it. We lived in a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a quiet, affluent suburb. It was a house I had designed and whose construction I had personally overseen. Jessica drove a late-model luxury SUV, a vehicle I had paid for in cash. She had a credit card with a generous limit for her shopping, her spa days, her long lunches with friends who were all married to men with more prestigious titles: doctors, lawyers, investment bankers. I never denied her anything she asked for, because seeing her happy was, for a very long time, the primary objective of my life. I loved her. I loved the woman I thought she was. The problem was, the comfort I provided was, in her eyes, a cage. A comfortable, well-appointed cage, but a cage nonetheless. She saw the house not as a home we built, but as a symbol of our stagnation. She saw my steady job not as a source of stability, but as proof of my lack of ambition. "Mark, did you see the pictures Caroline posted?" she'd ask, scrolling through her phone at the dinner table, a place I had naively tried to keep as a sanctuary for conversation. "She and Tom are in Tuscany. Again. The villa they rented is just divine." Her voice would trail off, a delicate sigh punctuating the unsaid accusation. "Why aren't we in Tuscany? Why aren't you like Tom?" Tom was an investment banker. He worked 80-hour weeks, was perpetually stressed, and barely saw his wife, but he provided a lifestyle that photographed well. That was the currency Jessica had come to value most. The appearance of success, the envy of others. My currency, presence, stability, devotion, had been severely devalued in her personal stock market. Her mother, Eleanor, was the chief market manipulator. Eleanor had never approved of me. She saw me as a common laborer who had somehow lucked into marrying her pristine daughter. Her phone calls with Jessica were a constant drip of poison into the well of our marriage. "A project manager, darling," I once heard her say through the thin wall of my home office. "It's just a fancy title for a man in a hard hat who tells other men where to put things. You could have had so much more." I let it slide. I told myself it was just a mother wanting the best for her daughter, even if her definition of best was shallow and materialistic. I worked hard, came home every night, handled the finances, maintained the house, and assumed my actions would speak louder than Eleanor's words. I assumed my love was enough to counteract the poison. That was my first great miscalculation. The discontent grew from a low hum to a persistent roar over the last 2 years. Jessica became more distant, her affection transactional. A kiss on the cheek felt like an invoice for the purse she wanted to buy. An evening spent together felt like an audition I was constantly failing. She started spending more time with her friends, especially a new circle centered around a woman whose husband, Julian Croft, was a charismatic and flashy real estate developer. Julian was everything I wasn't. He wore expensive suits, drove an imported sports car, and spoke loudly in restaurants about deals he was closing. He dripped with the kind of manufactured confidence that impresses the insecure. Jessica was deeply insecure. She started mentioning his name more and more. Julian says the market is ripe for an overseas investment. Julian took his whole team to Vegas for the weekend. Julian just bought a penthouse downtown. Each mention was a small cut, a comparison designed to make me feel my own inadequacy. I didn't feel inadequate. I felt tired. Tired of the endless, pointless competition she was running in her head. The inciting incident, the moment the world fractured, was on a Tuesday. I had wrapped up a site inspection early. We were finalizing a major commercial development downtown, a project I was personally managing. The work was complex, but things were clicking into place. Feeling good about the day's progress, I decided to go home early and surprise Jessica. Maybe we could go out for a nice dinner, reconnect, talk about something other than the lifestyles of her friends. I pulled into the driveway, noting her SUV was there. I let myself in quietly, holding a bouquet of freesias, her favorite. The house was silent. I walked through the foyer and toward the kitchen, and that's when I heard her voice drifting from the sunroom at the back of the house. She was on the phone, and she was laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a cruel, triumphant sound. "Oh, Mother, you won't believe it," she said, her voice giddy. "It's finally happening. Julian officially asked me to leave Mark. He secured the financing for his new lakeside development, and he said he wants me there, by his side, when he breaks ground." I froze in the hallway, the flowers suddenly feeling heavy and foolish in my hand. My heart, which had been light moments before, turned to a block of ice in my chest. I know, she continued, responding to something her mother said. "It's been an eternity. 15 years with that boring man. 15 years of watching paint dry. But it's over. I'm finally going to have the life I deserve." There was another pause. The divorce? Oh, that will be easy. What's he going to do? He can't afford a decent lawyer. I'll take him for everything. The house is in both our names, so that's half mine right there. I'll get the car and I'll demand alimony. My lawyer says given our lifestyle, I can get a huge settlement. He'll be stuck in some sad little apartment, paying me for the rest of his life. It's perfect. The cruelty was breathtaking. It wasn't just that she was leaving me. It was the glee she took in the thought of my ruin. It was the complete dismissal of our shared history, of everything I had provided, everything I had tried to be for her. I was not a person to her. I was a line item on a balance sheet, a failed investment she was finally cashing out at a profit. "Broke Mark," she snickered, and that was the phrase that echoed in my head. He'll never see it coming. He's too simple. He still thinks a hard day's work is something to be proud of. God, it's pathetic. I backed away slowly, my movements silent and precise. I walked out the front door, got back in my truck, and placed the freesias on the passenger seat. Their sweet scent filled the cab, a fragrance that now smelled like deceit. I drove away from the house I had built, from the life I thought was mine. The shock was a physical thing, a cold wave washing over me. But beneath the shock, something else was already taking shape. It wasn't rage. It wasn't despair. It was a cold, hard clarity. She thought I was simple. She thought I was weak. She thought I was broke. She was wrong on all 3 counts. And I was going to let her build her entire new life on that flawed foundation before I kicked it out from under her. The game she was playing was checkers. The one I was about to begin was chess. I drove for an hour, aimlessly, letting the initial tidal wave of pain wash over me and recede. The hurt was real, a sharp, physical ache in my chest. 15 years of my life, of my loyalty, had been reduced to a punchline in a conversation with her mother. The woman I had promised to love and protect was actively plotting to financially cripple me for her own gain, and she was laughing about it. The betrayal was absolute. But as the miles passed, the emotional storm began to subside, replaced by a chilling calm. The shock gave way to analysis. The hurt solidified into resolve. Jessica saw me as a simple man, a blue-collar worker who got lucky. She had no idea who I really was. The mid-sized construction firm I worked for, Miller Construction, was a subsidiary. It was one of 12 subsidiaries held under a parent corporation called Titan Holdings, a diversified real estate and private equity firm I had founded with 2 partners right out of college. My partners had cashed out a decade ago, leaving me as the sole owner. I kept a low profile deliberately. I hated the flash and arrogance that often came with wealth. I found genuine satisfaction in the tangible work of construction, in seeing blueprints turn into buildings. So, I created a role for myself, Mark Miller, project manager. It allowed me to be on-site, to be involved in the work I loved, without the suffocating bubble of being a CEO. My net worth wasn't something I discussed. It was a tool, not an identity. Jessica knew I had some investments, but she assumed it was a modest retirement portfolio, not a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. My greatest mistake was believing she had married me for who I was, not for what I had. Her greatest mistake was never bothering to find out. I pulled over into a rest stop and took out my phone. I didn't call a friend to vent. I didn't call my family to cry. I called David Chun, the head of Titan's legal department and my closest friend for 20 years. He was the only person besides my accountant who knew the full picture of my life. "Mark," he answered, his voice crisp and professional. "Everything all right? You're not usually calling at this hour." "I need you, David," I said, my own voice steady, devoid of the emotion churning inside me. "It's personal. It's Jessica." I laid it all out, a dispassionate, repertorial account of the phone call I had overheard. I repeated her words, her laughter, her plans to take me for everything. David listened patiently, without interruption. When I was finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mark, I am profoundly sorry," he said finally, the professional tone replaced by genuine concern. "That is monstrous." "It is what it is," I replied. "The feelings can wait. Right now, I need strategy. She's going to file for divorce. She thinks I'm poor. She thinks the house is our biggest asset. She's going to come at me with everything she thinks she's entitled to." "Let her," David said, and I could hear the gears of his legal mind already turning. "This is good, Mark. Her ignorance is our greatest asset. Don't confront her. Don't let her know you know. Go home. Play the part of the blindsided, heartbroken husband. Let her be the one to initiate everything." "The house," I said. "She mentioned it was in both our names." "Check the deed," David instructed. "But I'm fairly certain when we set up your personal trusts 10 years ago, we transferred the title to the Blackwood Trust for liability protection. We may have added her as a co-trustee for appearances, but you are the sole beneficiary and have exclusive authority. She has no claim to the asset itself. And the accounts. All your primary investment accounts, your ownership of Titan, it's all locked down in corporate structures and irrevocable trusts established long before your marriage. She has no access, no claim. The only things she can touch are the joint checking and savings accounts. What's in them? Maybe 100,000, I estimated. I keep them funded for household expenses. Then that's what she's entitled to. Half of that, David said. Mark, the plan is simple. We do nothing. We let her make all the moves. We let her file. We let her lawyer send us the most outrageous list of demands. We let her think she's winning. You play the part of the beaten man. Move out if she asks. Find a small apartment. Give her every impression that she has bled you dry and that you are powerless to fight back. We will compile every receipt, every social media post of her lavish life with this new man, every demand she makes. We build a case of marital waste and infidelity so airtight that when we finally get to court, She won't get a single penny more than what the law strictly allows, which will be next to nothing. The decision was made in that moment. There would be no tearful confrontations, no begging her to stay, no angry shouting matches. My marriage was not a relationship to be saved. It was a hostile business negotiation to be won. My objective was no longer her happiness, but my own quiet, decisive victory. I would let her build her castle in the sky with Julian, and I would spend my time methodically digging out the ground beneath it. I drove home. I walked in the door and found her in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone. She looked up, her expression a mask of cool indifference. "You're home early," she said. "Finished up on site," I replied, my voice even. I threw my keys in the bowl by the door. I walked over to the counter where the freesias still sat. I picked them up, walked to the trash can, and dropped them in. She raised an eyebrow. "What was that for?" "They were wilting," I said. Then I looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, I saw not the woman I loved, but a stranger. A hostile stranger. "We need to talk." The conversation was a masterclass in disingenuousness on her part. She feigned regret, spouting cliches about growing apart, about needing to find herself. She never mentioned Julian. She framed her desire to end our 15-year marriage as a journey of self-discovery. I played my part, acting confused, then hurt, then resigned. I let her control the narrative. When she suggested I be the one to move out to give her space, I agreed without a fight. "I just think it would be for the best, Mark," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I know this is hard, but we need to be adults about this." "Whatever you think is right, Jess," I said, my voice quiet. Her relief was palpable. She had expected a fight, arguments, pleading. My quick capitulation was, in her mind, confirmation of my weakness. The next day, I found a small, one-bedroom apartment in an older building across town. It was clean, sparsely furnished, and screamed divorced man on a budget. It was the perfect stage. While I was packing a few boxes with clothes and personal items, Jessica was on the phone with her lawyer, a detail she made sure I overheard. Her voice was loud, confident, listing her demands. The house, the SUV, spousal support to maintain the lifestyle to which she had become accustomed. It was a declaration of war, and she thought I was coming to the fight completely unarmed. The moment I moved into that sad little apartment, the real work began. David and I established a secure communication channel. He began the legal preparations, all under the radar. My job was simpler, to gather evidence and maintain my cover. I started my days by going to the job site as always, but my focus shifted. I was now managing the most important project of my life, the systematic dismantling of Jessica's delusions. The first step was a complete financial audit. I had my family office, the small, elite team that manages the finances of Titan Holdings, pull every statement from every account Jessica had access to for the past 2 years. The picture that emerged was stark. The spending on the joint credit card had skyrocketed in the last 6 months, coinciding perfectly with the time she had become close with Julian. There were hotel bills from nearby cities for girls' weekends I now knew were lies. There were charges from high-end restaurants I had never been to, jewelry stores where she hadn't bought gifts for me or her mother, and a series of large cash withdrawals from ATMs near Julian's downtown office. It was a clear and undeniable pattern of marital waste, funneling our shared resources into her affair. Each statement was scanned, documented, and added to a growing digital file David labeled the Jessica Project. Next, I hired a private investigator, a discreet professional David had used for corporate work before. I didn't need sordid pictures. I needed a timeline. I needed confirmation of cohabitation and a record of their public behavior. The investigator was good. Within a week, I had a report detailing how Julian was essentially living in my house. The house I had willingly vacated to give her space. His sports car was parked in my driveway every night. They were seen around town, dining, shopping, presenting themselves as a couple. The investigator also provided a preliminary background check on Julian Croft. He was flashy, but his financial situation was precarious. He had a mountain of debt, a history of failed projects, and several pending lawsuits from unhappy investors. He was a house of cards, and Jessica had mistaken him for a fortress. While all this was happening in the background, my life on the surface remained pathetically simple. I drove my old work truck. I wore my work boots and jeans. I bought my groceries at a discount supermarket. I let my friends, the ones we had shared as a couple, know that Jessica and I had split and that I was going through a tough time. The narrative she was building, that of a poor, abandoned husband, I helped her construct, brick by brick. Her lawyer, a shark named Alan, soon sent the official demand letter. It was even more audacious than I had imagined. He demanded exclusive possession of the marital home, ownership of the SUV, half of my fictional retirement savings, and $10,000 a month in alimony, for life. He painted a picture of Jessica as a wronged woman who had sacrificed her own career potential to support my meager one, a claim so absurd it was almost comical. David and I reviewed the letter in his office, a sleek, minimalist space overlooking the city from the 40th floor of the Titan building. "This is beautiful," David said, a rare smile playing on his lips. "He's done half our work for us. This letter is a monument to their overconfidence. They haven't done an ounce of due diligence." "So what's our response?" I asked. "A simple, polite rejection of every single point," David said. "We won't counter. We won't explain. We will simply state that his demands are not based in fact and that we will see them at the preliminary hearing. Our official offer will be this. She can have half the balance of the joint accounts as of the date of separation, and she can keep any personal items she purchased. That's it. No house, no car, no alimony." The response threw them into a rage. Alan called David's office, shouting about bad faith negotiations. Jessica sent me a string of furious text messages. "Are you insane, Mark? After everything I did for you? You think you can just throw me out with nothing? I will ruin you. I will take you to court and expose you for the cheap, controlling man you are." I read the message, took a screenshot, and forwarded it to David for the file. I did not reply. My silence was my most effective weapon. To her, it was the silence of weakness, of a man who had no moves left to make. She couldn't comprehend that it was the silence of a predator waiting patiently for its prey to step deeper into the trap. As the divorce proceedings crawled forward, Jessica's new life went into overdrive. Her social media became a showcase for her supposed upgrade. There were pictures of her and Julian on a yacht, captioned, "Finally breathing fresh air." There were photos of them at charity galas, clinking champagne glasses, captioned, "With a man who knows how to live." There was a particularly galling post of her standing in my kitchen, with Julian's arm around her, captioned, "Making new memories in our new home." Every post was another nail in her legal coffin. David's team cataloged them all. Julian, for his part, was playing the role of the conquering hero. He was lavishing her with gifts I knew he couldn't afford. A quick look into his suppliers and creditors through Titan's commercial database showed he was running on fumes, leveraging every asset to maintain his facade of wealth. He was trying to land one big project, the lakeside development Jessica had mentioned, to save himself. What he didn't know was that the primary investor he was courting, a quiet equity firm from out of state, was a shell corporation I controlled. He was pitching his salvation to the very man whose life he had helped ruin. The irony was exquisite. Months passed. We went through a mandatory mediation session. It was the first time I had seen Jessica in person since I moved out. She looked radiant, dressed in a designer outfit that probably cost more than the monthly rent on my apartment. She sat beside her lawyer, looking smug and confident. I sat beside David in a simple suit, my expression neutral. Alan, her lawyer, laid out their case with theatrical bluster. He spoke of Jessica's emotional labor, her years of support, her sacrifice. He presented their demands as not just reasonable but morally necessary. When he was finished, the mediator turned to us. "Mr. Miller, your response?" David spoke for me, his voice calm and measured. "We reject the demands in their entirety. As we stated in our letter, Miss Vance is entitled to 50% of the joint marital assets, which, after debts, amounts to $47,550. We have a cashier's check for that amount right here. The house is not a marital asset. It is the property of a private trust. The vehicle is registered to a corporation. As for alimony, given Miss Vance's documented infidelity and the clear evidence of marital waste, we will be arguing for a complete denial of any spousal support. The color drained from Jessica's face. Alan sputtered, caught completely off guard. A trust? What trust? This is an obvious attempt to hide assets. The trust was established in 2008, 6 years before their marriage, David replied smoothly, sliding a document across the table. It is perfectly legal and ironclad. You'll find all the relevant paperwork in the discovery documents we provided your office last week. Perhaps you should have read them more closely. Alan shuffled through his papers, his face turning a shade of crimson. He hadn't done his homework. He had believed his client's story of a simple, broke husband and hadn't bothered to dig any deeper. Jessica stared at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and fury. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to be broken. I was supposed to be begging. Instead, I sat there, silent, while my lawyer calmly and systematically dismantled her entire case. The mediation ended in a stalemate, but the first major crack had appeared in Jessica's new reality. She left the room rattled, the smug confidence replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. They would push for a court date, of course. They had to. Her entire future with Julian was predicated on a massive settlement from me. A few weeks later, the final piece arrived, the wedding invitation. It was sent to my apartment, a deliberate act of cruelty, a final twist of the knife. See what you've lost? See how much better my life is without you. She had no idea that the invitation wasn't an insult. It was an opportunity, a beautifully engraved, cream-colored opportunity to bring the entire charade to a spectacular, public conclusion. I called David. I have the date and the venue, I said. The Lakeside Manor. He read from the invitation I had forwarded him. He let out a low whistle. Bold choice. Booking that place requires a 50% deposit, and the balance is due on the day of the event. Julian is gambling everything on your money. There's something else you should know about the Lakeside Manor, David, I said. Look up the property records. See who owns the holding company, Northern Shore Properties. There was a pause as I heard him typing. Then a soft chuckle. Oh, Mark, you magnificent bastard. You've owned it for 3 years. I bought the land as part of a distressed asset portfolio, I explained. The venue came with it. I kept the existing management in place. They have no idea who the ultimate owner is. They just send the profits to a holding company. So, Julian Croft is throwing his victory party in your house, David mused. The poetic justice is staggering. It gets better, I said. His Hail Mary project, the one he's been pitching to save his company? The primary investor he's been courting? Sterling Equity Partners. Don't tell me, David said, his voice filled with admiration. That's one of ours too, I confirmed. We've been stringing him along for 2 months, getting a full look at his fraudulent books. We have everything we need to not only pull his funding, but to file a civil suit that will bankrupt him 10 times over. The plan was now complete. All the pieces were in place. Jessica and Julian had built their future on a foundation of lies, greed, and a complete underestimation of the man they had wronged. They had invited me to their wedding to mock my defeat. They had no idea they had just invited me to foreclose on their entire world. The day of the wedding arrived, a perfect, sun-drenched Saturday in June. I spent the morning at a real job site, the downtown tower, watching a crew pour the concrete for the final floor. There was a deep satisfaction in it, the creation of something solid, something real. It was a stark contrast to the hollow artifice I would be witnessing later. I went home to my small apartment and got ready. I didn't wear a tuxedo. I chose a custom-tailored navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a simple, elegant silver tie. It was understated, but it was the kind of suit whose quality was apparent only to those who knew what to look for. It was a suit that cost more than the car Julian drove. I looked at myself in the mirror. The man looking back was not the sad, defeated husband Jessica thought she knew. This was the man who owned the building she was getting married in. I arrived at the Lakeside Manor as the cocktail hour was in full swing. The venue was stunning. A sprawling stone building overlooking a serene lake, manicured lawns stretching down to the water. Jessica had certainly gotten the backdrop she wanted for her social media triumph. I handed my keys to the valet and walked in. A few of our former mutual friends saw me. Their faces registered shock, then pity. They probably thought I was there out of some pathetic, lingering attachment. I nodded politely, accepted a glass of water from a passing waiter, and found a quiet spot on the terrace to observe. Jessica was a vision in a wildly expensive-looking white gown. She moved through the crowd like a queen, her laughter loud and brittle. Julian was by her side, his arm possessively around her waist, a smug grin plastered on his face. They looked like the perfect couple, a portrait of wealth and happiness. But I could see the cracks. I saw the way Julian's eyes darted around the room, the slight tremor in his hand as he held his champagne flute. He was a man betting his last chip. I waited. The timing had to be precise. As the guests were being ushered into the grand ballroom for dinner, David arrived, accompanied by two other men in dark suits. They were not guests. One was a process server. The other was the head of security for Titan Holdings. David gave me a slight nod from across the foyer. Phase 1 was in motion. The process server walked calmly through the crowd and approached Julian. "Julian Croft?" he asked politely. Julian, annoyed at the interruption, nodded. "Yes." The man handed him a thick legal envelope. "You've been served." Julian's face went pale as he tore it open. He scanned the first page, his eyes widening in horror. It was a lawsuit from Sterling Equity Partners for financial fraud, breach of contract, and racketeering. The damages they were seeking were astronomical. It was a legal bomb that had just detonated his entire career. "What is this? This is insane," he stammered, looking around wildly. His eyes met mine across the room. For the first time, a flicker of something other than arrogance appeared in his expression. Confusion. At the exact same moment, David and the head of security approached the venue manager, a harried-looking woman with a clipboard. "Ma'am," David said, his voice calm and authoritative, "I represent Northern Shore Properties, the owners of this venue. We have an issue with the payment for this event. The final payment is due at the end of the night," she said, flustered. "Our terms have changed," David stated, handing her a document. "Due to newly discovered information regarding the financial instability of the client, Mr. Croft, we are calling in the full balance immediately. If it cannot be paid within the next 10 minutes, your staff is instructed to cease all services and shut down the event." The manager stared at the document, then at Julian, who was now being accosted by a panicked-looking Jessica. The carefully orchestrated fantasy was beginning to unravel. Chaos was blooming. This was my cue. I walked over to where Jessica and her mother, Eleanor, were standing, watching Julian argue frantically on his phone. Jessica saw me approaching, her face a mask of fury. "You," she hissed. "What are you doing here? Did you do this?" "Hello, Jessica." "Eleanor," I said calmly. Before she could continue her tirade, David joined us. He looked at Jessica with an expression of polite indifference. "Miss Vance," he said, extending a file folder. "I believe these are for you." She snatched the folder from his hand. Inside were several documents. The first was a copy of the court filing from our divorce case. It was a motion to dismiss all of her alimony claims, citing the mountain of evidence of her infidelity and marital waste. It included copies of her credit card statements, the private investigator's report, and printouts of her own social media posts. The second document was a certified copy of the deed to the house she thought she would get. It showed that the Blackwood Trust had sold the property 2 weeks ago to a lovely family from Chicago. The proceeds had been absorbed back into the trust, to which she had no claim. The final document was a simple one-page summary of the corporate structure of Titan Holdings, with a clear line of ownership pointing directly to one person, Mark Miller. It included a list of its major assets, including Miller Construction, Sterling Equity Partners, and Northern Shore Properties. I watched her face as she read it. It was a slow, agonizing process. The confusion turned to disbelief, the disbelief to dawning horror. She looked from the paper to me, then back to the paper. Her mind, so accustomed to simple, surface-level truths, couldn't process the information. What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "That," David said quietly, "is reality. The reality you never bothered to investigate. You thought you were married to a project manager. You were. But that project manager also happens to own the company, and the company that was about to fund your fiancé, and the building you're standing in right now." Eleanor snatched the paper from her daughter's hand. Her perfectly made-up face crumbled as she read. This can't be real." "I assure you it is very real," I said, speaking to her for the first time. My voice was not angry. It was not triumphant. It was simply factual. "You thought I was poor, Jessica. I was not. I was quiet. You mistook quiet for weakness. You mistook a simple life for a small 1-inch. Across the room, the music had stopped. Waitstaff were beginning to clear plates. Julian, his face ashen, was screaming at the venue manager, who was standing her ground. He had no money. The party was over. He looked over at Jessica, his expression turning from panic to pure venom. This is your fault. Your broke ex-husband did this." He pointed a finger at me. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the man who just bought all your debt," I said evenly. "And the man who is going to own your company when this is all over. You built your career on lies, Julian. You can't be surprised when it ends with the truth." Julian stared at me, then at Jessica, then back at me. The final piece clicked into place in his mind. He had been played. He turned to Jessica, his face contorted with rage. "You told me he was a nobody, a broke loser. You've ruined me." And with that, he turned and stormed out of the ballroom, leaving her standing there in her $1,000 dress amidst the ruins of her 5-minute fantasy. Jessica's entire body began to shake. The world she had so carefully constructed, the life she believed she was entitled to, had evaporated in a matter of minutes. Her friends were staring. The guests were murmuring, grabbing their coats. Her mother was speechless, looking at me as if she were seeing a ghost. Jessica looked at me, her eyes finally clear of the arrogance and filled with a desperate, pleading terror. "Mark, please," she stammered. I didn't know." "That's the point, Jessica," I said, my voice soft but firm. "You didn't know because you never cared to know. You never cared about who I was. You only cared about what you thought I wasn't." I didn't wait for a response. There was nothing left to say. I turned my back on her mother, on the wreckage of the wedding she had invited me to witness. David fell into step beside me as we walked out of the ballroom, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices, utterly and completely alone. We walked out into the cool evening air, the sound of the lake lapping gently against the shore. I didn't look back. There was no sense of elation, no thrill of victory. There was only a profound and quiet sense of finality. A chapter of my life, one defined by a lie I had allowed and a betrayal I had not deserved, was over. The drive back to the city was quiet. David didn't press for conversation, for which I was grateful. He understood that this wasn't a moment for celebration. It was the end of a long, painful, and necessary process. It was an amputation. The diseased limb was gone, and while the phantom pains of what used to be might linger for a time, the body was now free to heal. The next morning, I woke up in my small, temporary apartment for the last time. The sun streamed through the cheap blinds, and for the first time in a long time, the light didn't feel intrusive. I packed my few belongings into 2 cardboard boxes, left the key on the counter, and walked out without a backward glance. The role of the beaten man was finished. I didn't go to the Titan building. I didn't go to a construction site. I drove 2 hours north into the hills to a piece of land I had bought years ago. It was 100 acres of rolling forest with a high meadow that overlooked a valley. It was my sanctuary, the one place that had remained untouched by the drama of my life with Jessica. I parked my truck and walked to the center of the meadow. The air was clean, the only sounds the wind in the pines and the distant call of a hawk. I unrolled a set of blueprints I had been working on in my spare time over the last few months. They weren't for a skyscraper or a commercial complex. They were for a house. A small, elegant structure of wood and stone and glass, designed to blend into the landscape, not dominate it. A home for one. Standing there, under the vast open sky, the last vestiges of bitterness and hurt seemed to fall away. Jessica's betrayal had inflicted a deep wound, but it had also, inadvertently, given me a gift. It had forced me to reevaluate everything. For 15 years, I had built my life around her happiness, muting my own identity to fit the simple mold she saw me in. I had lived a half-life, hiding my capabilities and my true self in the name of a love that turned out to be an illusion. Now that was over. The court proceedings were a formality. Jessica, without funds and abandoned by Julian, was represented by a court-appointed lawyer who could do little more than capitulate. The judge granted the divorce, awarding her exactly what David had offered in the beginning: half of a joint bank account. She left the courthouse a free woman, with just enough money to start over, but stripped of the house, the car, the status, and the future she had been so certain was hers. I heard through the grapevine that she and her mother moved into a small apartment on the other side of the state. She had gotten the sad little apartment she had wished for me. I never spoke to her again. There was no need. The lesson had been delivered, the score settled. Vengeance, I discovered, was not a fiery, passionate act. It was a cold, methodical process of allowing people's own character flaws to lead them to their inevitable end. I had not ruined Jessica. I had simply stepped out of the way and allowed her to ruin herself. As I stood on that hill, looking at the plans for my new life, I thought about the nature of wealth. Jessica and Julian had chased the outward symbols of it: the cars, the parties, the expensive trinkets. They believed wealth was something to be displayed. But they were wrong. True wealth isn't about what you have. It's about what you can build. It's the strength of your integrity, the foundation of your self-respect, the quiet confidence that comes from creating something real and lasting. My life with Jessica had been built on a lie. My next one would be built on truth, on a foundation of solid rock, here in this quiet meadow. I had lost a wife, but I had regained myself. And in the end, that was a trade I was more than willing to make. I folded the blueprints, took a deep breath of the clean mountain air, and got to work.